"Be my bride," Jeff said, dropping to one knee, his voice cracking with desperation. Mara stared at him, her eyes wide in shock. She was just a waitress, and now, standing in front of a man she barely knew, the man who had been left at the altar, he was asking her to replace the bride who had walked away. Her hands trembled, and the tray of wine glasses felt like it weighed a ton as she struggled to comprehend the situation unfolding before her. The ballroom was silent, the guests frozen in place. They'd all been waiting for the bride, and now they were witnessing something no one could have expected. Mara could clearly see how hurt he was. His jaw clenched as he blinked back the tears, but they were still visible, glistening in his eyes, raw and unhealed. The crowd watched as the weight of rejection seemed to break him further with every passing second. Mara couldn't afford to break him again. She wasn't supposed to be a part of this, she wasn't even meant to be involved in the chaos that had erupted, yet here she was, the center of it all. She felt the weight of the silence pressing in, the eyes of the entire hall on her. The air was so thick with tension it was suffocating. How could she say no? How could she be the one to crush his heart further, when she could see how vulnerable he was, how lost? "Please marry me," Jeff pleaded, his voice trembling, a mixture of hope and desperation. Mara felt her chest tighten. There was no turning back, no walking away from this moment. The decision would change everything. Without a word, she placed the tray of wine glasses on a nearby table, her actions calm, though her heart raced. The eyes of the room were on her, waiting, anticipating. She knew there was no way out. This wasn't just about Jeff, or the strange twist of fate that had brought her into this moment, it was about everything she had ever wanted, and everything she had ever feared. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. "I will marry you." The moment the words left her mouth, a quiet gasp rippled through the room. Jeff blinked, the shock in his expression slowly melting into something like hope. He quickly pulled the ring from his pocket, and with shaking hands, he slid it onto her finger. Mara's life had been a constant rollercoaster of ups and downs, each one more punishing than the last. Orphaned at a young age, she had been forced to live with her aunt, Mrs. May, a woman who seemed to take pleasure in controlling her every move. From the moment she lost her parents, Mara's life belonged to her aunt, and it was clear that she wasn't there out of love, she was there to be used. Her aunt's house wasn't a home. It was a place where Mara served her every need, from the moment she woke up until the night she fell into bed, exhausted and still unloved. Mrs. May wasn't cruel in a way that others could see, she was simply neglectful, treating Mara as nothing more than a tool to get her own way. Despite the circumstances, Mara was smart. She wasn't given the opportunity to attend school, but she made up for it by seeking out knowledge herself. She would stay up late into the night, reading whatever books she could find, teaching herself things others her age were learning in classrooms. If knowledge was her only escape, then she would drown in it. From the time she was little, Mara had helped her aunt with her work, starting at the very bottom. It was just a small local restaurant, nothing fancy, but over the years, Mrs. May expanded it into a catering service. All the while, Mara worked tirelessly, setting up tables, serving guests, and doing the dirty work. She never saw a penny of the profit. She never even got a thank you. Every mistake, every misstep, resulted in nothing but harsh scolding and punishment. The only thing Mrs. May cared about was the money, and no matter how much Mara helped earn, none of it was ever for her. Mrs. May's daughter, on the other hand, went to the best school in town, lived a comfortable life, and was treated like royalty. But Mara? She was just a servant, a shadow in the corner, invisible unless she was needed for something. And yet, Mara still held onto a spark of something, a quiet, steady hope that one day, she might find a way out. But how? There was no escape from the iron grip of Mrs. May's control, and no way for a girl like Mara to change her fate. She was destined to live a life where nothing was hers, where her own dreams seemed out of reach. That was, until Jeff came into the picture. As Jeff slipped the ring onto Mara's finger, a sudden silence gripped the room. For a moment, it was as if time had stopped. Then, almost immediately, the noise erupted. Some guests murmured, their voices filled with confusion. "He's not in his right state of mind," one of them whispered. "He can't be serious. This isn't real," another one commented, their words full of disbelief. Mara could barely hear them over the pounding of her own heart. She was still trying to process everything, still trying to understand how she had gotten here, and yet, the moment the ring settled on her finger, it was as though the room was alive with chatter. But the one person who said nothing, the one who froze in complete shock, was Mrs. May. Mara felt her aunt's eyes burning into her. The woman had always controlled every aspect of Mara's life, and yet here she was, standing silent as Mara made her own decision. Mrs. May had never been one to let things slide, and Mara couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. How could she say yes without consulting her? How could she make a choice like this, without Mrs. May's approval? The thought alone was almost too much for her aunt to bear. Before Mara could think any further, a group of well-dressed women, perhaps wedding planners, or friends, gathered around her. They moved quickly, their hands light but firm as they ushered her out of the wedding hall. They didn't give her a chance to protest, not that she was sure she would have. The room felt like a distant memory as Mara was led down a long corridor and into the bridal suite. The doors closed behind her, shutting out the chaos of the ballroom. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and soft candles, but it did nothing to ease the tension that coiled around her chest. Sit, sit, one of the women instructed, guiding her toward a plush chair in front of a vanity. She obeyed, too overwhelmed to protest. Within minutes, they were all around her, taking off her waitress uniform and replacing it with something entirely unfamiliar, a delicate gown that shimmered in the light, a designer wedding dress that hugged her figure in ways she never thought possible. They worked swiftly, transforming her from a simple waitress into a bride. As they worked, they whispered amongst themselves, the air thick with the buzz of excitement. The makeup was applied, the hair styled, the dress perfectly fitted. It was like she was in a dream, no, a nightmare, and yet, she couldn't seem to wake up. Within what felt like an eternity, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was someone she didn't recognize. The transformation was complete. The waitress who had worked tirelessly for someone else, who had never been given a moment to choose for herself, was now dressed in a bridal gown, her life about to be changed forever. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation as Mara, now dressed as a bride, re-entered the wedding hall. The murmurs from the guests stopped as soon as she stepped into view, but Mara didn't flinch. She walked with a steady, almost regal grace, her eyes fixed ahead, not on the faces that stared at her with curiosity, shock, and judgment. She could feel the weight of all eyes on her, but it didn't matter. She had become something different in the past hour, someone new, or perhaps someone who had always been buried beneath the surface, waiting for the chance to step out. The women who had helped her transform, now acting as her bridesmaids, flanked her as she moved toward the altar, the silence stretching between every footstep. When she reached Jeff, he took her hands in his eyes soft with an emotion she couldn't quite place. His vulnerability still lingered in his expression, but there was something else there now, a flicker of hope, of relief, as if she had given him a lifeline in the storm of his heartbreak. The officiant spoke, his voice cutting through the quiet of the hall. Do you, Jeff, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, through sickness and health, for better or for worse? I do, Jeff said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The officiant turned to Mara. And do you, Mara, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, through sickness and health, for better or for worse? Mara swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what she was doing, no idea what this was going to mean for her, but she nodded. I do, she said, her voice unwavering despite the chaos in her mind. Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The guests seemed to hold their breath for a moment, as if waiting for something, anything, to happen. The officiant looked at them both and smiled. Is there anyone here who thinks this union shouldn't hold? A hushed silence filled the hall. No one moved, no one spoke. All eyes were on the crowd, but the question hung in the air unanswered. Very well, the officiant said, smiling, you may kiss your bride. Jeff stepped forward, his hands reaching up to gently cup Mara's face. For a brief moment, she froze, not knowing what to do, feeling like the entire world was watching this one moment. She had never imagined a kiss like this, a kiss that would bind her to a life she never planned for. But before she could think too much about it, Jeff leaned in, and their lips met, soft, brief, but full of promise. The crowd erupted into applause, but Mara barely heard it. She was still trapped in the moment, her mind racing to catch up with the reality of what had just happened. She was married. You may be wondering how it all got here. Who was the lady who abandoned Jeff at the altar, and why? Jeff was a complete lover boy. He loved deeply and believed in love with all his heart. For him, there was nothing he wouldn't do for someone he loved. His ex-fiancée, Rachel, had played him well, and her betrayal would come to define the course of his life. Jeff resided in the USA, while Rachel lived in Nigeria. Despite the physical distance, Jeff did everything he could to make her feel loved and cared for. He took care of her financially, sending her money to cover her education, renting her an apartment, and even supporting her family. He was completely invested in their relationship. However, unbeknownst to Jeff, Rachel had another man in Nigeria, someone she was truly in love with. She had been deceiving him from the very beginning. Their relationship had always been an online one. Jeff trusted Rachel completely, pouring his heart into a love that was built on messages and phone calls. But there were many things happening behind his back, things that Jeff couldn't see from thousands of miles away. Still, he made his intentions clear to Rachel. Once he returned, he wanted to settle down with her, build a life together in Nigeria, and create something lasting before returning to the States. Rachel, of course, played along. She knew that Jeff's return meant the moment of truth for their relationship. She had plans of her own, but they were nothing like what Jeff imagined. When Jeff finally arrived in Nigeria, true to his word, he proposed to Rachel. She accepted his proposal, knowing that all of this was just part of her game. She saw it as a way to milk Jeff dry, taking everything she could from him, all while playing the role of the loving fiancé. And Jeff, blinded by love, he couldn't see through the facade. As the wedding preparations began, Jeff poured his heart and his wealth into making Rachel's dreams come true. He wanted a grand wedding, a day that would mark the start of their beautiful future together. Rachel didn't have to ask twice for money. Jeff was willing to give her whatever she needed, convinced that it was all for their future. But things began to take a darker turn when Rachel asked for a large sum of money, a 50 million naira deposit for a business venture she claimed she wanted to run. Without hesitation, Jeff sent the money, eager to support her entrepreneurial dreams. It was at that moment that Rachel ended the game. She had gotten everything she wanted, and now she was ready to disappear. On the morning of their wedding, Rachel sent Jeff a message that would shatter his world. "I don't love you, Jeff. I can't marry you. You were just a game I played, and I'm not showing up to any wedding." Jeff thought it was a cruel joke, but as he frantically tried to reach her, the truth hit him like a freight train. Rachel had blocked him on every social media platform. In his desperation, Jeff checked her accounts and discovered a video that made his blood run cold. It was of Rachel and the man she truly loved, kissing each other passionately, clearly showing that Jeff was nothing more than a pawn in her scheme. The reality of the situation hit Jeff like a tidal wave. Everything he had worked for, everything he had done for Rachel, had been a lie. The woman he trusted, the woman he had given so much to, had used him for his money, for his love, and for everything he was willing to give. And now, on the day of their supposed wedding, she was gone, leaving him heartbroken and humiliated, standing alone at the altar. Jeff couldn't let this day go. He had invested so much money into this wedding, and his heart was breaking in 1,000 pieces. The lavish venue, the grand decorations, the guests who had traveled from far and wide to witness the union of two souls, it all felt like a cruel joke. His life had been turned upside down in the worst possible way, and the woman he had trusted, the woman he had loved so deeply, was gone without a trace. He stood frozen at the altar, the empty aisle in front of him mocking the love he thought he had built with Rachel. His heart felt heavy, as though it were suffocating him. But despite the overwhelming pain, Jeff couldn't bring himself to walk away from all of it. He had poured everything into this day, every penny, every ounce of energy, and yet here he was, abandoned, humiliated, and heartbroken. As the murmurs of the guests filled the air, Jeff's eyes landed on Mara. She was just a waitress. But in that moment, Jeff couldn't look away. She was moving through the hall with grace, serving the guests, doing the work no one else wanted to do, without a word of complaint. She seemed so different. While everyone around her was caught up in the spectacle of what was supposed to be a celebration, Mara remained focused on her task, silently making sure everything went smoothly. She wasn't like the other women in the room. She didn't seem out of place, but there was something quietly resilient about her, something that drew Jeff in despite the overwhelming grief that gripped his heart. No one knew exactly what was going on behind the scenes. The guests had waited and waited for the bride to appear, only to hear Jeff's father announce that the wedding would be cancelled. In a hasty attempt to salvage the evening, the announcement had been made that the event would instead be turned into a welcome party for Jeff, a way of celebrating his return, now that the bride had abandoned him. But for Jeff, none of it mattered. The words seemed hollow in his ears. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He had spent his whole life dreaming of a moment like this, only for it to be ruined by betrayal. In a daze, Jeff stood up, his legs shaking beneath him. His eyes locked onto Mara as she passed by, seemingly unaware of the eyes that were watching her. Without thinking, he walked toward her, the weight of his heartache pressing down on him. When he reached her, he dropped to his knees in front of her, as if his very life depended on the decision he was about to make. "Be my bride," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The room went silent as Jeff's vulnerability filled the space. "I know this may seem insane, but please, marry me." The reception followed immediately after the exchanging of vows, and the atmosphere shifted as if a new chapter had begun. The guests, who had once been on edge, now filled the hall with excitement and cheers. Jeff and Mara took to the dance floor, their first dance as a married couple. The music played softly, but the applause and cheers from the crowd were overwhelming. They swirled together, moving to the rhythm, but Mara could hardly focus on the steps. It felt surreal, like a scene in a movie, where everything was happening too fast, too unreal to process. For a moment, she closed her eyes, feeling the cool air of the room and the warmth of Jeff's hand on her back. The weight of the day, the strangeness of it all, began to sink in. She wasn't a bride in the way she had ever imagined, she wasn't the woman Jeff had truly wanted, but in that instant, as they moved together, she couldn't shake the feeling of being at the center of it all. The guests, from family to friends to curious onlookers, were on their feet, clapping and cheering. It was like a spectacle, no longer a wedding, but a celebration of Jeff's resilience, and Mara's unexpected presence in the center of it all. As they danced, something unexpected happened: money. The crowd erupted into applause as bills were tossed into the air, fluttering down like confetti, landing on Jeff and Mara. It was as if the whole room had turned into a carnival of support, with people showing their joy in a way that was both generous and strange. The money rained down around them, a symbol of their new beginnings, but also a strange reminder of the wealth that Jeff had poured into this entire event. The guests laughed, and the cheers grew louder, especially from Jeff's friends and family, who were ecstatic about the unexpected turn of events. They all rallied around the couple, offering their best wishes and support. It was a moment of triumph for Jeff, a moment where his heartbreak had transformed into something almost magical. But not everyone was celebrating. Mrs. May sat in her seat, her eyes narrowing as she watched the scene unfold before her. She couldn't believe what was happening. Her gaze flicked back and forth, her mind calculating, observing every detail. She watched the money flutter to the ground, and her eyes shifted to the piles accumulating at Jeff and Mara's feet. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she mentally counted how much was landing on the floor. It was a spectacle, but for Mrs. May, it wasn't about celebration. It was about opportunity. She could barely contain her irritation as she sat frozen in her seat, calculating how she could benefit from the situation. She gripped her glass tightly, eyeing Mara from across the room, a cold gleam in her eyes. She had never wanted Mara to be a part of this day. The girl was nothing but a pawn in a game that wasn't hers to play. But Mara was playing it well, unknowingly becoming the star of the show. As the night stretched on, the party slowly began to wind down. The music softened, and the laughter, while still loud, began to feel distant, like the final echoes of a dream. The guests had enjoyed their moment, and the celebration continued into the evening as people began to leave, the crowd thinning bit by bit. The lights flickered softly, casting shadows on the walls. Jeff and Mara stood together, exchanging smiles, though neither of them could really understand what had just happened, or what it meant for them in the long run. It had been a whirlwind, a strange twist of fate, but now, the reality was settling in. The gifts kept coming in, bags of presents, envelopes of cash, and kind words. It felt like a dream, and Mara wasn't sure if it was a dream she had wanted, or one she had simply been forced to step into. She glanced at Jeff, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something like hope in his eyes, despite the chaos that had led them here. As the last of the guests made their way out and the music faded into the background, the two of them stood alone in the vast hall, with just families, the decorations slowly dimming, the excitement waning. The party was over, but what came next? They didn't know. Before Jeff and Mara left, Jeff turned to her, his expression more serious than before. I called a family meeting later. I think we need to figure out what's next for us. For both of us, he said quietly, his eyes filled with an uncertainty that mirrored her own. Mara nodded, feeling the weight of the words. What did he mean by figure out? Was this just about Jeff and his family, or did it include her too? Her heart raced with the thought of it all. She was still trying to process everything that had happened that day, the wedding, the unexpected vows, and now, a family meeting with a man she barely knew. Before she could respond, Mrs. May's voice cut through the tension. Where do you think you're going, young lady? Mrs. May's sharp words rang in the air as she approached them, her eyes hard and calculating. Mara froze, feeling her aunt's presence like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. The woman was as domineering as ever, and now, her grip on Mara seemed more suffocating than ever. Mara, you can't possibly think you're going anywhere with him. You have responsibilities, and I expect you back at home now. You're not leaving me, not after everything that's happened. Mrs. May's gaze flickered from Mara to Jeff, and then back to Mara again. But this time, Mara wasn't ready to fall back into her aunt's control. I can't go home right now, Mara said, her voice calm but firm, surprising even herself. I need time to think. Time to figure things out. Mrs. May's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing with disbelief. For a moment, she looked as if she might say something biting, but instead, she swallowed hard and fell silent. She was stunned, unable to comprehend that Mara, her niece, the girl she had always thought of as little more than a servant, was defying her. The realization was a blow to Mrs. May's pride, and for the first time, Mara could see her aunt struggling to maintain control over the situation. Without a word, Mrs. May stepped back, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. Her eyes lingered on Mara for a moment longer, filled with the icy fury of a woman who had lost her hold on the situation, before she turned and walked away without another word. Mara's breath caught in her chest as she glanced at Jeff, who gave her a look of silent understanding. Without saying anything further, they walked out of the ballroom, past the stunned guests who were still buzzing with gossip, and into the cool night air. Their gifts, well packaged and neatly arranged, sat beside them in the car. The bag of money, now a heavy symbol of the chaotic day, rested between them on the seat. The weight of it all felt almost too much for Mara to handle. She was still unsure of what she had agreed to, but one thing was certain: everything had changed. She wasn't the same girl who had entered that wedding hall earlier that day, and neither was Jeff. As they drove away, the city lights flickering in the distance, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a life she hadn't chosen, but one that was now impossible to escape. Where do we go from here? Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure if she was speaking to Jeff, or if it was just a question tumbling out from the chaos in her mind. Jeff glanced over at her, his eyes soft but firm. Home, he said simply. You're safe now. I promise. The weight of his words settled in the car, and for a moment, Mara let herself believe it. Safe. The word was foreign to her, a strange concept she had never truly experienced, but the sincerity in Jeff's voice made her want to trust him, if only for a moment. As the car drove through the night, the city lights slowly faded behind them, and the landscape changed. The further they traveled, the more the world around them seemed to shift into something new and unfamiliar. When they finally arrived at Jeff's grand mansion, Mara couldn't help but stare out of the car window in awe. The house was bathed in a soft glow of sparkling lights, each window twinkling with a warmth that seemed to promise something different than the coldness she had known. It was like something out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare she never imagined herself part of. She had never seen anything like it: a mansion, standing tall and proud, surrounded by manicured lawns and gates that closed behind them with a soft click. She didn't belong here. Not in this world of wealth and grandeur. But then again, she hadn't belonged in her aunt's home either. Jeff, sensing her discomfort, turned to her with a reassuring smile. It's a lot to take in, I know. But for tonight, just let it go. You've been through too much. Rest, and tomorrow, we'll talk. We'll figure it all out. Mara nodded silently, too overwhelmed to say much more. The car came to a stop, and Jeff opened the door, stepping out before reaching back to help her. He guided her through the grand entrance, and the inside of the mansion was just as impressive as the outside. Marble floors gleamed under the soft lights, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and polished wood. Everything seemed perfect, meticulously planned, and meticulously cared for, but it all felt so distant from her own life, so foreign to her. Jeff led her through the massive hallway, his hand gently resting at the small of her back as they moved through the house. She had trouble taking it all in, the grandeur, the space, the sheer wealth that radiated from every corner. Here, Jeff said, opening a door to reveal a large, opulent master bedroom. The bed was enormous, draped with silky sheets and surrounded by rich mahogany furniture. The room looked like something out of a fairy tale. I know you're tired, get some rest. You've been through so much today. We can talk about everything tomorrow, but for now, just relax. You're safe here, Jeff added, his voice softer now, almost protective. I promise. Mara hesitated at the doorway, the weight of the day still pressing down on her. She wanted to protest, to ask about what would happen next, to question everything, but the exhaustion in her bones made it impossible to do anything but nod. She stepped inside the room, feeling the softness of the carpet under her feet, and let herself be enveloped by the quiet. The weight of the day seemed to settle around her, and for the first time in a long time, Mara allowed herself to let go, if only for a moment. She turned back to Jeff, who stood in the doorway, watching her with a look that was both concerned and gentle. Thank you, she said quietly. The words felt small, almost inadequate in this strange new world, but they were all she had. Jeff smiled softly. Rest, Mara. Everything else can wait. And with that, he left her alone in the room, the door clicking softly behind him. Mara stood still for a moment, staring at the bed, her heart racing with uncertainty. But slowly, she moved toward it, allowing herself to sit on the edge. She couldn't understand what had brought her here, but as she lay back against the soft pillows, she closed her eyes, feeling the comfort of the bed beneath her. She needed rest, but more than that, she needed clarity. And she knew that tomorrow, when the sun rose, everything would need to be figured out. For now, though, the house was silent, the night stretching on, and for the first time, Mara allowed herself to sleep in a place that felt both unfamiliar and, somehow, like it could become home. The next morning, the quiet of the mansion was interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps. Jeff was the first to wake, the early light of the day filtering in through the large windows. He moved silently, careful not to disturb Mara, who was still wrapped in the deep slumber of exhaustion. In the kitchen, he quickly prepared breakfast, simple but thoughtful: eggs, toast, fresh fruit, and orange juice. He wasn't sure what she liked, but he knew enough to make something comforting. He didn't want to wake her just yet, so he quietly carried the tray up to their room, placing it gently on the table by the bed. The soft clink of the tray against the wood was the only sound as he stepped back, taking a moment to look at her sleeping form. With a soft sigh, he moved to the wardrobe, picking out comfortable clothes for her. Something simple, but enough to make her feel more at ease. He knew it was important to give her space, but also wanted to make sure she felt cared for. After selecting a soft sweater and pair of leggings, he set them neatly on the bed before quietly stepping out of the room, leaving her in peace to wake up when she was ready. As he left, the stack of gifts and the bags of money from the wedding sat in the guest room, piles of material wealth from a day that had been both strange and painful. The money was the least of Jeff's concerns, a reminder of what was lost, and he left it all behind as he focused on what really mattered now. Mara's eyes fluttered open slowly, the soft bed beneath her unfamiliar but comforting. She stretched out, the warmth of the room making her feel safe in a way she hadn't expected. For a moment, she simply lay there, taking in the silence of the room, the lavishness that was a far cry from the life she had known. She had never been taken care of like this before, and the experience was both surreal and strange. It felt good, but it also made her feel like she didn't belong. The sunlight kissed her face, and after a moment of stillness, she got up, slowly making her way to freshen up. The soft sound of the water running was soothing as she splashed her face with cool water, trying to wake up fully. Afterward, she sat at the table, the tray of food Jeff had prepared waiting for her. She ate slowly, savoring the food that was far better than anything she'd ever had, but even as her body relaxed, her mind raced. She felt like an outsider in this world, but she couldn't ignore the kindness Jeff had shown her. It was overwhelming, especially after everything that had happened. Once she was finished and dressed in the comfortable clothes Jeff had laid out for her, she left the room. Stepping into the hallway, she found Jeff sitting in the sitting room, waiting for her. He was sitting by the large windows, his hands folded in front of him, his expression unreadable. Mara took a deep breath, walking over to him and sitting down across from him. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the mansion. "Thank you for yesterday," Jeff said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of gratitude. "You saved my day, and I can't stop wondering why you didn't say no, especially when you don't even know me." Mara's chest tightened at the question. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected him to acknowledge the gravity of the decision she'd made. "I couldn't let the tears I saw in your eyes drop," she said softly, her voice trembling a little. "I didn't know how to say no, seeing that you were not yourself." Jeff looked at her, his expression softening. "I will do whatever you want me to do," he said gently, his words weighted with sincerity. "I know what we have now is not out of love, but I'm willing to do anything you want. If you want us to be together, or want to live your normal life, I won't stop you." Mara was quiet for a moment, the words swirling in her mind. She wasn't sure what to say to that. She hadn't come into this with any clear idea of what it meant, but Jeff's honesty made her feel like there was a chance for something new. Something different. But she needed answers first. "I want to know why she didn't show up," Mara said finally, the question that had been bothering her since the moment Jeff had dropped to his knee. Jeff nodded slowly, his expression darkening as he leaned forward. "You deserve to know," he said, before launching into the story of his heartbreak. He told her everything, how Rachel had deceived him, how he had given so much of himself to her, only to find out she had been playing him from the start. The betrayal cut deeper with each word he spoke, but Mara could see the calm in his eyes, the quiet acceptance of it all. Mara couldn't help but feel sad on his behalf, the weight of his story pressing against her heart. "She's so heartless," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You could sue her, get everything back." Jeff smiled faintly, shaking his head. "I know I could. But let her go with everything. I leave it all to nature," he said softly. "I'll find my way through this. I just want to move forward." Mara couldn't help but admire his strength, his ability to let go when everything had been taken from him. It wasn't something she could easily do, but she understood why he did it. "And you?" Jeff asked, shifting the focus. "How's life as a waitress?" Mara bit down on her lip, the question catching her off guard. She hadn't expected him to ask, and now that he had, it felt like a weight she had been carrying for so long was suddenly being brought to the surface. Her chest tightened, and before she could stop herself, the tears came. They poured out in a flood, the emotions she had kept buried for so long finally spilling over. She didn't know how much she had been holding on, how much the pain of her life had built up inside of her until now, when it all came rushing out. Jeff sat there, silent, allowing her the space to cry, not saying anything, but offering a kind of understanding she hadn't known she needed. For the first time in a long time, Mara let herself be vulnerable. "I was just a waitress," Mara said softly, her voice tinged with a bitterness that had been hidden for so long. "I earned nothing aside from the roof over my head and food to eat." She let out a quiet, humorless laugh through her tears, the weight of it all finally sinking in. "I was just existing every day with no way out, or maybe I just wasn't bold enough to risk it all." Jeff didn't hesitate. He placed a gentle hand on hers, his voice steady but firm. "You are bold," he said, his words a quiet affirmation that gave Mara a sense of warmth she had never known. It was as if, in that moment, she was seen for the first time. Mara looked up at him, meeting his eyes as she shared her story. She told him everything: the loneliness, the suffocating control of Mrs. May, the lack of choices, the quiet dreams that never seemed to materialize. She spoke about the years of serving others without a second thought for herself, the way life had simply passed her by while she was stuck in a role she never asked for. As she spoke, Jeff listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. And when she was done, it was clear that he saw her in a new light, not just as the woman who had unknowingly stepped into his life, but as someone who had endured far more than he ever realized. It made sense to him now why she had refused to go back with her aunt. Days passed, and the two of them, strangers in so many ways, continued to be kind to each other. They hadn't known each other long, but there was a quiet understanding between them, a gentle bond that was slowly forming. Their decision to stay married and see what the future brought seemed less like a temporary arrangement and more like the beginning of something new. Neither of them was rushing to define it, but they were both willing to let it unfold in its own time. But while Jeff and Mara were finding their way, Mrs. May was seething with fury. She had always seen Mara as a tool, someone to do her bidding and stay in line. But now, her niece had not only defied her but was living in a grand mansion with a man like Jeff, someone Mrs. May had never imagined Mara would have access to. She couldn't stand the idea of her niece, a nobody, having everything she had never given her. Her anger was only compounded by the fact that Mara had left her business, a venture Mrs. May had relied on for so long, leaving her feeling betrayed. It wasn't just about the wealth or the mansion, it was the audacity of Mara to take control of her life, to walk away from her and enter a world she didn't belong in, all within the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, Rachel, oblivious to the aftermath of her betrayal, had moved to Lagos. She felt like a queen, surrounded by the life she had always wanted. She partied with her real man, opening a grand boutique that was all her own. She lived in luxury, spending money she had taken from Jeff, all the while keeping her family in the dark about the true cost of her actions. They remained far away in Awaka, unaware of the pain she had inflicted on someone who had loved her so deeply. Soon, the day of the family meeting arrived. Jeff had invited his parents, and Mara had invited Mrs. May, much to the older woman's reluctance. Mrs. May couldn't believe her eyes when she arrived at the grand house where Mara now lived. She had imagined the day Jeff would ask Mara to leave, thinking that his temporary compassion would fade, but that hadn't happened. Deep down, Mrs. May hoped that Jeff would see reason, that he would ask Mara to leave, now that the decision had been made. But as she sat down at the table with the others, she saw that there was no going back. Mara and Jeff sat side by side, hands intertwined, their presence solid and unwavering. They were a unit now, despite the strange circumstances that had brought them together. With calm voices and steady gazes, they made it clear to everyone present, "We are going to stay married, at least until further notice." Mrs. May couldn't hide her disapproval. "You could have paid her off," she spat, always focused on the money. "You could have let her go." "If I wanted that," Mara responded, her voice cutting through the tension, "I would have said so." The words were sharp, but they held truth, and Mrs. May was left speechless, her mouth closing as she stared at Mara in shock. The change in Mara was undeniable. She wasn't the meek, obedient girl who would cower in front of her anymore. She had found her voice, and Mrs. May was beginning to see it. There was nothing she could do to stop them now. As the meeting ended, everyone waited to see what would happen next. What kind of future could a marriage like theirs have? Would it last, or would it fizzle out as the days passed? The questions loomed, but for now, it was a quiet moment of acceptance. Jeff's parents, who had watched their son go through heartbreak, were nothing but grateful for Mara. She had been the one to step in when he was at his lowest, when everything seemed lost. They praised her, they thanked her, and as a gesture of appreciation, they gifted her a brand new car as a wedding gift. It was a symbol of their approval, and a small token for all the kindness she had shown their son. Mara, still adjusting to the whirlwind of her new life, couldn't help but smile. It was overwhelming, but it was a kindness she had never known, and for once, she allowed herself to accept it. She didn't have all the answers, but as she stood there with Jeff by her side, she realized that perhaps this strange, unexpected marriage could be the beginning of something entirely new, a chance at a life she hadn't thought possible. And as they left the meeting, their hands still clasped together, neither of them could say what the future held, but for the first time, they felt like they could face it together. Jeff and Mara sat side by side in the guest room, the quiet hum of the mansion around them as they began to sift through their wedding gifts. They had spent the past few hours slowly unpacking the boxes, carefully setting aside each gift as if the process itself was a moment to savor. The lavishness of the presents, the overwhelming amount of wealth that seemed to have been poured into their unexpected union, was a stark contrast to the simplicity of their lives before. But it wasn't the lavish jewelry or the designer clothes that caught their attention. It was the baby gifts, the soft blankets, tiny shoes, cradles, and adorable onuses. As they stared at each gift, their hands gently touching the small things, something unspoken passed between them. It was a reminder of the life they had yet to build, and in that quiet moment, they realized how much they were willing to create together. Mara turned to Jeff, her eyes filled with a mix of wonder and uncertainty. "Do you think we'll ever have kids?" she asked softly, not sure where the question came from, but feeling the need to ask it nonetheless. Jeff's eyes softened, a tender hope filling them. He reached over, taking her hand in his. "I think we will," he said quietly, his voice steady with a quiet optimism that she couldn't help but be drawn to. "I want to see our kids laughing and playing, their smiles lighting up the room." The thought of it felt distant, like something far off in the future, but it also felt warm, something to look forward to. In a life that had been marked by so much chaos, this glimpse of a family, a future, was comforting. They spent the next few hours counting the money they had received from their wedding guests. The pile seemed never-ending, stacks of cash slowly accumulating on the floor. Each time they thought they were finished, there was another pile, another envelope filled with more money. After 3 days of meticulous counting, Mara's eyes widened when she saw the final total. 50 million. In cash. It was a staggering amount, and that was only the cash from the gifts. On top of that, there were transfers made directly into Jeff's account. The wealth, the generosity, the shock of it all left them both in awe. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, they both found themselves smiling. It was a reminder that despite everything that had happened, they were now in control of their future. With the weight of the past few days settling in, Jeff decided they both needed a break, a chance to reset and unwind from the chaos. They needed to go somewhere to clear their minds and figure out what came next. So, he took Mara on a vacation, a trip to a serene beachfront location where they could just be themselves, away from the pressure of expectations. The trip was nothing short of amazing. They rode bikes along the beach, the salty breeze blowing through their hair as they pedaled along the shoreline, laughing together like two people who had all the time in the world. They went on long walks, hand in hand, through the soft sand, their feet leaving footprints behind them. At night, they dined under the stars, enjoying the quiet and peaceful surroundings that gave them space to breathe and just be. They also tried other activities, embracing the joy of doing things neither of them had ever considered before. They took a cooking class together, laughing as they tried to perfect a local dish they'd never even heard of. They went snorkeling, marveling at the underwater world they had never imagined existed. The days felt free, unburdened by the weight of responsibilities and expectations. By the end of the trip, something had changed between them. They hadn't known each other long, but in these few days, they had shared experiences that were beyond what most couples went through in years. The walls between them had started to crumble, and a deeper connection began to form. Jeff found himself watching Mara with a sense of admiration he hadn't expected. Her quiet strength, her kindness, the way she made him laugh, it all began to pull him in slowly, gently. He was falling for her, and though it had started as a marriage of circumstance, he knew now that it was becoming something more. When they returned from the trip, it was clear to both of them that they were ready to begin a new chapter. Jeff's first investment was in something that would give Mara the chance to finally pursue something she loved, opening a grand restaurant. He knew that even though she had never gone to school, Mara had unknowingly acquired a skill over the years, cooking and serving. She had spent her whole life doing it without realizing that it was a gift, a talent that could now be turned into something powerful. They named the restaurant Mara's Kitchen, a place where her love for food could finally shine. Jeff helped her every step of the way, managing the business side of things while she poured her heart into the menu, the decor, the ambience. The restaurant was a hit from the start, with the combination of Jeff's business acumen and Mara's dedication and passion for cooking creating a perfect blend. Mara invested all her energy into making the restaurant a success. She was no longer the waitress who had worked tirelessly for someone else's profit. Mara's kitchen was hers. It was a reflection of everything she had wanted for herself but had never been given the chance to achieve. And with Jeff's support, the restaurant began to boom. They employed new staff, hired experienced chefs, and Mara was finally able to take a step back from the demanding kitchen work and focus on what truly mattered to her, making sure every dish that left her restaurant was made with love and care. Together, they were making waves. They became a power couple in the business world, their restaurant thriving, and Jeff's new company beginning to take off as well. There was a sense of accomplishment in the air, a feeling of certainty that no matter what came next, they could handle it together. And as their success grew, so did their bond. They were no longer just two strangers bound by an unexpected marriage, they were partners, both in business and in life. The future looked bright, and with every passing day, they both realized that what had started as an arrangement had blossomed into something real. They had built something together, something that was more than just a business or a marriage. It was a future. And it was theirs.